Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It is BS show. No, it's not. Where'd that come from?
It's close enough. We talked to the S and BS yesterday momentarily.
Yeah.
So that's why that's why it's on your brain.
God, I'm screwing my. You
don't have to apologize.
You can't
to me.
teach.
It's like being in a new relationship and you just call me your old partner, Brad.
Yes, which never works out well. It's bjshow.co. bjshow.co. I got a comment from a listener yesterday that they don't like the fact that we call it the Brad and John Show. They think that sounds sort of stupid. And I go, well, what do we call it? And the response was, I like when you talk about the fact that it's the bjshow.co. I said, okay, fine.
Nice, okay.
bjshow.co.
That's good feedback.
But the idea being is some point in time you have to explain what the B and the J stands for because we might get in a little bit of trouble if we don't do that, if you know what I'm saying.
Because people would think it was blackjack. People would think that we were promoting
exactly what they're thinking.
Casino gambling.
That's exactly what they're thinking. Okay, it is the Friday before another 3-day weekend, and it's to some people it's the Friday before a weekend that they didn't have to work because they haven't been to work since last Wednesday. Not this past Wednesday, but Wednesday the week before the last holiday, because they've been off all that time. I had an argument with one of a current teacher in the Hazelwood district who I know. And it's funny because the argument was I said that when I went to school in the Hazelwood School District, we didn't have spring break. We got Good Friday off. Do you remember this? Does this sound right?
Yeah. You know what? Actually, I don't. I can't honestly say I remember what our calendar was.
We had Good Friday off. We didn't have a spring break, and our Christmas break was however the days were, where Christmas fell. We went to school the day before Christmas Eve. So in other words, our last day of school would have been the 23rd. And we went back to school on the day after New Year's if it was a weekday. Obviously,
I think that sounds about right.
Right. So we didn't get like 2 weeks. Now they get like 2 weeks. Yeah. And what's interesting was I'm going back and forth with this particular person. So I put it out on my high school. I'm a member of my high school class on Facebook. And pretty much everybody agreed with me. Matter of fact, some people said, absolutely, you were absolutely right. I've talked about this before. We didn't get a week for spring. And once again, the difference was back then, we didn't start school till the day after Labor Day. None of this August crap. We started the school after the day after Labor Day, and typically we got off like the first week in June. Now, the reason for that was that I believe they've changed the number of days. DESI is, not Desi-Lou, but you know who I'm talking about. DESI, that's the
Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Right. They've changed the number of days, and if I'm not mistaken, back when I went to school, it was 160, and I think they've changed it to like 175 or something like that. But the other argument was I have always been an anti-half-day person. To me, half days are bogus, and the argument that came back at me from the teacher was, well, no, hold on a minute now. When do you want us to have we use that half day when the kids are in class in the morning, and in the afternoon we use that half day for professional development. And my response was, okay, let's think about this for a minute. Let's say there was a requirement for professional development for restaurants, that everyone that worked at a restaurant had to have professional development time where you took like 4 hours and the cooks were taught, safety in the kitchen, and the waitresses and waiters were taught, proper client appreciation and how not to,
and social emotional skills.
How to deal with, tough customers and blah, 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 blah. And let's say they decided to have their professional development on Friday between 6 and 10 in the evening. And the teacher went, well, they would never do that because that's an important time for them because that's when a lot of people go eat. You're making my point. They would pick a time when there would be no customers there, like let's say come in on Sunday morning from, 8 to noon and we'll do our professional development. She says, well, I would never come in on a Sunday morning. Matter of fact, I don't work weekends at all. That's the mentality of our educational system.
Well, Brad, right now, I hope you appreciate what you've done, because right now there will be somebody from urban area in Kansas City who listens to our show that is organizing Starbucks baristas, who's going to say,
and the location needs to shut down between 6 and 10, and we need to learn social emotional learning.
So maybe you've just started a movement here in Missouri, Brad.
But see, I guess I've always been, the thing for me is, if you trace my work history, okay, when I was like 13 years old, I had a job washing windows at a retail store, okay, and that I did that on Saturday, and then I used to cut lawns when I was a kid, back in the day, and it's so funny because of the fact that nowadays, I'm curious as to if people still have like the kid down the street cut their lawn, because there's all this legal aspect of the fact that he doesn't have workman's comp. He might not have a lawnmower that's OSHA approved. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, all the
he might use Venmo, and the IRS can't get to that unless he collects more than $600 a year.
Right. You have to issue him a 1099 because of the fact that that kind of stuff.
He's not a W-2. He's a 1099.
Right. It's like okay, can a kid just make a couple bucks on the side anymore? That kind of stuff. But, once again, then I worked in the restaurant industry. I worked at a grocery store for a while, worked the weekend stocking shelves. I worked at Steak and Shake. I started out washing dishes. Then I was a curb boy. Then after I graduated from high school, I went into the radio business and went to college and worked at the police department, about 24 hours a week. We did 3 shifts a week as a police dispatcher. I've worked, I can't tell you how many Christmases, how many New Year's, and any other stupid holiday. You name a holiday, I worked it. And sometimes for years and years and years. And you tell that to some, oh, well, that's terrible. You need to be with your family on Christmas. And the thing I always said was, back in the day when I first started my radio career, I was the producer for a guy by the name of Lee Langford, who was the talk show host on the old KSOQ, did a Sunday night, Monday morning talk show. And at the time, Missouri still had the blue law. And we had certain shows that Lee wanted to keep up on, because that was when it was sort of bubbling under that Missouri was going to get rid of the blue law. And for those of you who don't know what the blue law was stores in Missouri, for the most part, could not open on Sunday. And the problem was Illinois didn't have a blue law. So if you wanted to go shopping on Sunday, you jumped in your car and you drove across the river and you went to Fairview Heights or Alton or Belleville or whatever, and that's where you went shopping. Matter of fact, you could drive through. I remember my wife and I, when we first got married, we used to go over to there all the time. The blue law was still in effect, and we used to go to St. Clair Square all the time, and we'd laugh about how we'd go through the parking lot and rarely would we see an Illinois plate, all Missouri plates. Everybody is fair. So it's like all this tax revenue that Missouri is losing goes over to Illinois. Okay, so my job was, as producer of the show, and ultimately I hosted the show, but that was down the road. My job as a producer was to find guests. So he wanted to have it equally balanced. So like we would do an hour, and usually there would be somebody from, I don't know what it is, but you probably know the name of the Missouri Retail Association. Is this something like that now today?
Yep, the Missouri Retailers Association.
Okay, so that still is an organization, correct?
Yep, it is.
And he would come in, and he or she would come in, and they would say, well, here's the problem, Missouri. And they would state this exact fact. Missouri's losing tax revenue, in the St. Louis area, they're losing tax revenue to Illinois. And in Kansas, I think it was the same thing. There was no blue law in Kansas. So in Kansas City, people would go, from Missouri into Kansas. And I believe even the same thing like down in like Springfield and the Boot Heel and things like that you could go across the river into Tennessee.
Yeah, I believe it.
And Arkansas and places like that. So then we would have the people against the blue law, and most of them were religious people, and most of them were like pastors and things like that. And Lee would just set them up every time, and because they would say, well, that's God's day, and you should be with your family, you should be working, you should be having lunch together, and you should be doing things together. Everybody should have Sunday off. So Lee would always ask him, what do you do on Sunday? Well, after church, we go to the restaurant and we eat lunch, and then we go and we watch the movies, or we go, or if it's the summer, we go and we play golf, and Lee would always say, what about those people that work at the restaurant? What about those people that work at the movie theaters? And what about the guys who are running the Ameren UE plants that are keeping the lights on, and and the guys who are keeping the water running and the gas running, and and the police and the fire? Do they have Sundays? Well, that's different. That's different.
Well, Brad, we always talk about the fact, or I should say, I shouldn't put this opinion on you. I always talk about the fact that these things are multifactorial. And one of the things that just as I happen to see is that there might be a sense of entitlement there among people, because the weekends now you have, for people who have kids, the sports seasons are just year round now. So if your kid plays baseball, soccer, whatever it is, there's no just seasonal sports anymore. So I would say that most people who have kids, their weekends are chock full of driving around the country, or at least to a multi-state area, for volleyball tournaments, soccer tournaments, whatever. And they view that time they don't look at weekends as having free time for themselves. They think, man, I'm driving around the state of Missouri this weekend for a soccer tournament.
Well, to a certain extent, I did that with my kids, and my boys all played baseball, and my youngest son played soccer. My daughter was in the dance, and there were all these dance tournaments. And I hear what you're saying. It's to the point where we did a lot, and it's funny. You hear parents that have kids. Well, you've got some younger kids.
Yep.
And I mean, to the point where, are your kids involved in a lot of activities like that?
Oh yeah.
Well, it's the point.
It becomes trial and error of figuring out for the kid's age of what is too much. And the number one thing is you're never going to keep up with the Joneses. And just because your friends' kids are involved in 14 soccer leagues and 15 gymnastics classes and 12 dance classes doesn't mean that you should try to match their schedule.
Well, and you got to figure out the matrix of, okay, we got to pick up Johnny. He's at the soccer practice till 10. On Sunday morning. Oh God, boy.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm a big believer in people take on this responsibility themselves, and if you feel peer pressured based on what other parents are doing, and this is mostly, I would say, in 2023 and 2024, this is a mom's problem. Moms, I think, a lot of times feel pressured to have their kids in a lot of stuff, but that's a completely different topic.
That is John Combest. I am Brad Hildebrand. Together we are bjshow.co, as one of my people told me last night. Don't call it Brad and John Show. Just said bjshow.co. That's what it is, bjshow.co. Press release came out yesterday, and it's on westplex.news. Yes, we have a site that if you want news from the Westplex, westplex.news, not a .com, but not westplex.news.com. It's just westplex.news. That St. Charles County bought the National Equestrian Center. Do you know about the National Equestrian Center?
I saw that headline yesterday. I think St. Charles County put that out. You just said it's a press release. I saw it on their Instagram, actually.
Right. And if you've never been to the National Equestrian Center, it's in Lake St. Louis. It's off of Lake St. Louis Boulevard. And I believe it's like, I think the press release said that it has 3 acres under roof. And as it sounds, it's a big old horse, what do you call it? Horse arena, whatever you call it. I mean, they call it an equestrian center, but essentially it's a big old place where horses run around and they have all sorts of different competitions and things like that. And it draws from all over the country. And they have various events and exhibitions and competitions and things like that. And I thought it was interesting that, and I'll just tell you this up front, Steve Ellman is not a fan of the family arena. If someone came along with the right amount of money and said, hey, Steve, we'd like to buy that family arena, Steve would say, let's talk, and how quick can we close?
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. I wonder where he stands in this, because, it's sort of the equestrian center. I know we're talking apples and oranges, but it's sort of the same kind of thing where it's, you're having shows and things like that. And that's what he didn't necessarily want to get into as far as with the family arena. So, but on the flip side of it, I know that he's very much into developing the park system, and because of the fact that he feels that that's an aspect of that makes the county better. Matter of fact, where Shelley lives off Kisker. There was a new park they put in right off of Kisker. They've done a lot of things to, they bought. I don't know if they bought it. I think they might have been given to it. Klondike Park, which is an amazing park that sadly nobody goes to.
Where's Klondike Park?
Klondike Park is just before, if you're going down 94 toward Augusta, Klondike Park is right before you get to Augusta. If you're going on 94, you go through Defiance, and then you go what's on what they call, there's a little tiny town there. It used to exist, but it doesn't exist anymore, called Matson, Matson. And there's a long stretch of highway along there, 94, where you're down on the river bottom, and you're just paralleling the Missouri River. And people down there, they still call it the Matson Flats. And then all of a sudden, you make a quick right turn, and like a sweeping right turn. Then you make a sweeping left turn, and there's the entrance to Klondike Park. What's interesting is Klondike Park, the one edge of Klondike Park is where the new boat ramp is that they made for the Hoffmans for was it Miss Augusta or Augusta Belle? I don't even know what the name. The boat they brought in, and that's the Klondike Park, and it's an old quarry, which is sort of interesting, and supposedly. This was told to me, this was the history of it. It was originally, or not originally, but originally a long time ago, it was a quarry. And then a couple of guys, and what was told to me by a friend of mine, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but two gay guys who had a lot of money, bought the whole area and built a super fancy house in there. And for some reason, they didn't want the park anymore. I don't know, maybe they or the whole area, they didn't want it anymore. And they either gave it to the county or they sold it to them at a very low rate, and they turned their house into like an event center. So when you go into Klondike Park, it's sort of cool because you go in, and there's a road that goes completely around the park. In other words, when you go in the park, you go to the right, and then it's a great big road that goes the entire length of the park, and there's a bunch of things where there's areas. Every once in a while you'll hear where someone will be injured because there's a couple of cliffs where they dug out all the rock, and you walk up like a hill, and if you don't watch where you're walking, you fall down like 80 feet. Because it's and there's a couple places, there's picnic baskets up there, picnic benches and stuff like that, but there's never anybody there. It's always deserted. I don't care if you go through, pick a day, like tomorrow. If you go through Klondike Park, I know it's going to be sort of cold tomorrow and things like that, but let's say it's springtime. Let's say it's April 10th and it's a Saturday, and, at 11 o'clock in the morning, you drive through Klondike Park, you maybe will see 10 people. It's just nobody ever uses it, which is sort of sad.
Wow, yeah.
I'm
on the Wikipedia now, and it says that there is some good fishing there, allegedly, that you can catch some channel cat, some bluegill, some largemouth there.
Yeah, it's a really cool place. It's beautiful. Some people, the environmentalists, would say, "Oh, this is horrible. Look what they did to the ground, to this part of the earth. they mined it, and they left all these cliffs, and it's terrible." You know what I mean?
Your environmentalist voice is almost as good as your pothead voice, Brad. Which competes with my St. Louis public radio voice. So they're neck and neck.
Hold. No, nobody can beat my public radio voice.
I'm ready.
Thanks for listening to bjshow.co. We'll be...
Oh, yes. This is brought to you by Diane Rehm.
No, we don't want to make fun of her.
Did she bite the big one already?
I don't know, but she's not that old.
We should play. Maybe on the first show of the year we play. Did they die in 2023 or not? Because I'm really bad at that. I didn't know if Diane Rehm has bit the big one yet or not.
Do you know the story behind her?
I don't, but we're over time.
Okay,
maybe you tell us when we come back.
I'll pick that up on the other side of this break. It's actually sort of a sad story, really.
I won't look it up on the commercial break. I promise.
You won't look it up. Okay, it's 7:42.